So thank you everybody for joining this afternoon. And we have a very distinguished speaker, Professor P.P. Majumdar from Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. And let me say a few words about the sustainability seminar series. This is being organized by Kiran C. Patel Center of Sustainable Development at IIT Gandhinagar. So the center was established about a couple of years back with a mandate of not only high quality research in area of sustainable development, but also a significant outreach, awareness, capacity building, so that we can make a difference in specifically in the area of climate change, public health, environment, water, and so on and so forth. So we used to have this seminar series when where we invite distinguished speakers, and they'll come and visit our campus, stay 1 or 2 days, and interact with different faculty members as well as students, and they will also present their exciting work that they have been doing over the years. But given the COVID-19 crisis, we waited for a long and then decided that we should keep this going in an online mode. So with this brief introduction about the seminar series and the center, now I would take the opportunity to introduce Professor Majumdar. So I think whosoever is working in area of hydrology and water resources in India or in abroad, most of us know Professor Majumdar and the work he has been doing in these areas. So Professor Majumdar is currently serving as a professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, and he is also chairman of Interdisciplinary Center of Water Research at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. His area of specialization is water resources with focus on climate change impacts on hydrology, water resources, hydrologic extremes, flood hydrology, and uncertainty modeling. He is a recipient of prestigious Alexander von Humboldt Medal from EGU, which is European Geoscience Union, and the Distinguished Visiting Fellowship of the Royal Academy of Engineering, UK. He is also a recipient of J.C. Bose National Fellowship, and he is currently a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering, which is INAE, Indian Academy of Sciences, and Indian National Science Academy, which is INSA or ENSA. So Professor Majumdar has done tremendous work on floods, especially the modeling, monitoring, and real-time early warning systems on river basin and urban scale flood events. So we look forward to Sir Majumdar today, and we are very pleased to have you as our eminent speaker for this seminar series. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of entire IITGN community to this seminar series. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation. So Professor Majumdar, now is to you.
So first of all, thank you very much, Professor Vimal Mishra, for that introduction. And it's a great privilege and honor for me to deliver this seminar before this extremely learned audience. And this seminar series, I have gone through some of the earlier talks that you had arranged. I think this contributes very significantly in capacity building as well as in reaching out. So in this particular talk, I will be focusing mostly on the climate change and how it is affecting the floods. But I will also touch upon how the land use and land cover and all the development that is taking place on the ground that affects the responses to high intensity rainfall. So this work I have picked up mostly from my students and research staff. Dr. Arpita Mandal, who is in IIT Bombay as a faculty. Dr. Chandrarupa, she is a postdoc in Saskatoon. Dr. Ila Chawla worked on hydrologic modeling of floods. And Shailja Sharma has just completed and she is continuing as a RA with me. Bhargav Kumar is a PhD student, and Saimi Davis is a senior research fellow in one of the projects that we are doing now. So just as a setting, let us look at what is happening recently. In recent years, we have had Chennai floods in 2015, Kerala floods 2018, and just recently, in fact, just the last week, we had this Hyderabad floods. All of these have some things in common. One is that very high intensity rainfall, but consecutive days receiving very high rainfall. For example, Chennai floods, we had highest rainfall of approximately 100-year return period. And by return period, I mean for those who are not used to the terminology, we reckon the return period as that time interval at which the event will be equaled or exceeded. So similarly, the Kerala floods again had 300 millimeters plus rainfall consecutively, and there were two different spells, and these caused havoc in Kerala. And as you can see, the economic loss has been tremendous. For Chennai floods, actually, they are saying if you include the property loss, it will be 50,000 to 100,000 crores. This may appear very high, but it happened mainly because many of the automobile industries, etc., suffered huge losses. And this was almost irrecoverable loss. And Hyderabad floods, people are still recovering from that. Then we also had Uttarakhand floods, Kashmir floods. So all of these have some things in common. One is that most of them have received extremely high rainfall, and the rainfall has occurred, high intensity rainfall has occurred consecutive days. And this is what brings us to the questions of whether we are addressing the flooding issues in the hydrometeorology group correctly. So these are the questions of interest that we need to start looking at. First, are these high intensity rainfall events increasing really at global scales, regional scales, and at local scales? If so, can we say that such increase is due to climate change, or there are many other reasons, forcings that are driving this? Then once we say that these frequencies are changing, in fact, can we estimate these changing frequencies? And methodological improvements are needed there, and how do we do this? Then we come to the ground and look at hydrologic response of the catchments, whether the land use change and the rapid urbanization, etc., has it deteriorated the, it has mitigated, it has increased the impacts of the floods. Then we start looking at some research issues where high resolution numerical weather prediction models can be used along with the hydrologic models to see whether we can reconstruct the past floods, and is it possible to develop adaptive responses. In many of these flood events that I mentioned, especially Kerala floods, Chennai floods, etc., the reservoir operation came into question, whether the reservoirs were operated properly and so on. So we need to start looking at adaptive responses through reservoir operation. Now, like most presentations, I will also start with the IPCC reports. Now, this IPCC report, which was a special report, this is way back in 2012. Afterwards, several reports have come, but this shows that this is a 20-year return values of annual rainfall. In most of the regions, it is projected, although it is starting from 2046, but between 2020 and 2040 also similar trends are shown. And in most of the regions, especially you can see here South Asia where we belong, these intensities are known to be increasing continuously. But there is a very high regional variation of these. So let us start with what is happening in the cities first, and then I'll go on to the riverine floods. As you know, most of these cities, even those cities which used to receive very scanty rainfall, like for example, Jaipur, and uniform rainfall such as Baroda, Surat, even Nasik, these areas are getting flooded year after year now, which indicates that either the intensities have increased tremendously and we are unable to cope up with, or within the last 2 to 3 decades, the development has taken such a way that our responses, the hydrologic response to high intensity rainfall has been very poor. So we need to look at both these aspects. So let us see what happens when you are looking at a flooding situation in urban areas. This is very preliminary for hydrology students. The same intensity of rainfall happening in a pristine catchment like this will produce a very smooth response from this catchment as against the urban catchment here. Any rainfall that falls here quickly converts itself into runoff, and therefore the peak runoff here, this is a flow versus time graph. The peak runoff is very high. The peak value is very high compared to the pristine runoff, pristine catchment. The peak occurs much quicker, and the total runoff that is generated is much, much higher in the urban situation. And this causes a great, this creates a great challenge to handle the urban flooding situation. Now, this happens mainly because there is no scope for the water to either evaporate or infiltrate. And most of the water runs off like this on the surface. And therefore the drainage system and the way we drain the peak flows, etc., that becomes important. Now, most of you would have already heard about the urban heat island effect. When you create an urban area here, the materials of construction that we use, namely concrete, asphalt, etc., then because of lack of vegetation, because of waste energy that we generate from air conditioners, cooling systems, and so on, also because of the air pollution and the tall buildings. So we are actually creating an island which captures the heat, and this becomes a heat island. And it has been shown through several studies that the heat island effect tremendously increases the rainfall intensities. And now, the recent studies have also shown it's not just along the city, as it happens in longitudinal cities such as Bombay, etc., but also all across. Spatially, the rainfall intensity is increased because of the heat island effect. Now, this is one of the causes. We will also see some other causes. So I'll just quickly give you what we typically do. This is one of the projects that we have done. First, look at the historical analysis. Simply look at the rainfall, how it has behaved. And we use what are called as the intensity, duration, frequency relationships. We do several different types of analysis on the historical rainfall. Then we start looking into the future. If it has behaved in a particular manner in the past, how it is likely to behave in the future. That's what we do on the rainfall. So this is what is happening in the atmosphere. We bring down this rainfall to the ground and develop two-dimensional overland flow model, especially for the urban areas, because the urban areas behave much, much differently compared to the non-urban areas. And we use what are called as the shallow water equations here and then bring it down. Then we look at the drainage systems and see whether the drainage systems are adequate. If they are able to run freely, and in most of our situations, as all of us are aware, exactly when the drainage systems have to run freely, they are choked with solid waste and so on. So we do a lot of other things to examine those. Then we also look at very high resolution terrain data through LIDAR, light detection and ranging. This gives almost up to 0.2 meters by 0.2 meter resolution, a complete detailed DEM as well as DTM. And those things, those high resolution data, both from sensors that we develop in the deploy in the pilot area, as well as the high resolution digital elevation models, we bring it down and start looking at the hydrometeorological responses and develop flood mapping and so on. So these are some of the details here. We'll go through the presentation as we progress. Now, when we are looking at any particular city, there is a very significant spatial variation, and this we are all aware. If it is raining very heavily at one place, just about 2 to 3 kilometers away, there may be very scanty rain, or the rainfall may not be happening at all. The rainfall may be totally absent. So it is important for us to capture the spatial distribution. And luckily for Bangalore city, thanks to the KSNDMC, we have several such rain gauges. In fact, 100 rain gauges are present, and these are telemetric rain gauges. So we get the continuous data from there, and we analyze this and look at the frequency distribution of such rainfall. So at any station, this is a classical case for the hydrology students. When you have the time series, let us say that I'm looking at flood frequency analysis, and we are looking at the discharge at a particular location. This is shown for the riverine system. If you use the complete time series, you may get a distribution like this. This is just a probability distribution. But what we'll be interested in is really the behavior at the extremes like this. So we may pick up, this is one of the ways in which we pick up the extremes. There are several other ways. So simply look at the annual maximum series and then fit typically we use the generalized extreme value distribution. And what we are interested in is, in this distribution, we are interested in really the tail behavior, because the probabilities may be very small, but the impacts will be very large in this region. So we'll be interested in how these processes behave in the tail region and not in the normal region that other distributions will be talking about. Now, when we look at these, we typically look at the three parameters. Don't worry about the mathematical expressions, but remember that we need to look at these three parameters, mu, sigma, and psi. Now, we estimate these mu, sigma, and psi based on the historical data, be it the rainfall or the discharge, etc. We pick up the extreme values, fit this distribution. By fitting the distribution, I mean we estimate the parameters, mu, sigma, and psi, which means that we are holding this history constant, and whatever has happened in the history is likely to behave similarly in some statistical sense in the future. That's a basic premise. Now, when we look at IDF relationships, this is the intensity, duration, frequency relationship. Frequency is the return period, as I said earlier, maybe 10-year return period. The duration is the duration of the extreme rainfall. I'll come to that in a minute. And the intensity. So what is the type of intensity that is likely to happen for the extreme rainfall for a given duration for a given frequency? This is what is given by the IDF relationship. Now, typically in the urban areas, these durations that we need to reckon are much, much smaller, because what we call as the time of concentration, which means the extreme rainfall that happens, how quickly it reaches the end of the watershed. Now, these are small watersheds, urban areas, and then, as I said earlier, the peak occurs very quickly, and therefore the durations that we'll be interested in will be of the order of half an hour, 15 minutes, etc. I have shown it for 1 year, 1 hour duration here. As you can see, there is almost a 100% increase, or at least a 50% increase here that is shown for between the farther past and the nearer past here. Now, this is just based on the historical data, what has happened in the past, which gives an indication that the intensities are in fact increasing, and this I have shown it for Bangalore city. We also look at the temperature and see that the temperatures have also increased simultaneously. Whether we will be able to relate these two is a different question altogether, but it's just a data that shows that the historical average temperatures have increased over the city, especially after 40s, and the intensities have increased. Then we start asking the question, yes, the intensities are known to have increased over the past, but how are they likely to increase in the future? How do the short-term intensities, short duration, as I said, half an hour, 15 minutes, these are the kinds of intensities that we'd be interested in. How they will respond to climate change. And just as an example of climate change signals, we reckon climate change mainly through three visible signals, namely that the global average temperatures are increasing, the precipitation patterns are changing, and the sea levels are rising. Now, all of these may have implications on several of the hydrologic aspects, but we'll just focus on the flooding now. So how do we estimate this? Because the global climate models upon which we need to rely on when we are talking about the future, and especially to quantify the effects of climate change, we fall recourse to the climate models. But they operate on very large scales. Now we have methodologies to use statistical as well as dynamic downscaling judiciously in combination. In fact, up to certain level, you bring it by dynamic downscaling and do some statistical downscaling, and then go finer again using dynamic downscaling, etc. So through this particular figure shows a Japanese model. They bring it down to almost block level. And we have not been able to do that, but at least up to 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer, or even our ambition is to go to 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer resolution using both statistical as well as dynamic downscaling methods. Now, by doing this, what we essentially do is, recall that we were talking about the extreme values. So mu, sigma, and xi, we estimate based on the historical data. And because the historical data, because we are talking about extreme values, and because the historical data is of small length, we have significant uncertainty associated with the parameters estimated themselves. So we address these parameter uncertainty through the Bayesian methods, and then essentially look at how the classical frequentist approach, what kind of mean and variance they provide, and the Bayesian approach, what kind of mean and variance. There is not too much of a difference here. However, there is a huge uncertainty. For example, if you look at 0.25 hours, that is 15-minute intensities, which are important. The range may go for as much as from 110 to about 190. So this is a kind of range. So when we are looking at adaptive responses through hydrologic designs or otherwise, you need to start looking at these kind of uncertainties and these kind of possibilities that the future will hold. I'm sorry, this is not future, this is just the past, and we are trying to quantify the past. But it is also instructive to note that as the duration increases, for example, if you're looking at 24 hours, etc., there is not too much of a difference in the intensities, nor is there so much uncertainty associated with those. Then we look into the future, we use several models and several scenarios. And as I said earlier, these models operate at very coarse resolution. So we pick up just to address the model uncertainties, because different climate models provide, unfortunately, different projections. And especially when we are talking about local scale, we must address this uncertainty that arises out of the models. So we use this large number of simulations provided by the different models and for different scenarios, and bring it down to smaller scales. We are talking about the urban scales here. So we use about 85, this is done for CMIP 5 ensemble, about 85 simulations. We bring it down to urban scales. Typically, we may bring it down to station scales. If I have 100 stations, we may have from the larger scales, we bring it down to a particular station scale. Then, as I said, the climate models also operate, or they're reasonably good on large time scales. But we really need to bring it down to hourly and sub-hourly scales. So we use what is called as a hydrologic scale variance. For example, this may be 15 minutes, lambda t may be 15 minutes or 0.25 hours, and this may be 24 hours. So we start looking at the scaling relationships between what is happening at 15 minutes and what is happening at 24 hours. And there is a very good scale invariance theory in hydrology. We use that and bring it down to smaller time scales, 1 hour, 15 minutes, etc. Again, as you see, at 24 hours, etc., there is not too much of a difference. But when you come down to the urban scales, there is a significant increase that is shown, complete with all the uncertainties. That is, you quantify all the uncertainties. There is absolutely a very high intensity of rainfall that is seen. And this has been corroborated both in Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Hyderabad's cities, where we have done some studies. and the rainfall intensities are in fact known to be increasing continuously. Then we start looking at, as I said earlier, there is a very significant spatial variation of the high intensity rainfall. Now again, come back to the mu sigma and xi. When we are looking at one time series, you would have kept them as constant. But now you start looking at spatial variation of the extreme rainfall. And then you identify covariates, both geographic as well as climatological. And then model those parameters using these covariates and start looking at how spatially the high intensity rainfall is likely to behave. Now, these kind of maps, spatial maps, are important because if you are, let's say you are planning for some major infrastructure here, let's say some nuclear power plant or some such thing, or even a very large residential complex and so on, you cannot use an average value of the entire city for the high intensity rainfall and then build it here. So typically in Bangalore city, this southwest part is known to be receiving very high intensity rainfall. And this becomes important for many of the hydrologic applications. Then we ask the question, for a particular event, let us say September, just last month, this very heavy rainfall happened in Bangalore. Can we reconstruct this? And then if we are able to reconstruct, can we use that on a forecast mode? This is a question that we ask. And we use a numerical weather prediction model, NWP, that's a WRF, weather research forecasting model. This is what typically we use. And these are the details, model details. 1:3 is the ratio that we use here. Domain 1 is 9 kilometers and domain 2 is 3 kilometers. In fact, in the next stage, we are bringing down to 1 kilometer resolution. We use these boundary conditions given by NCEP actually, and this is a 3-hour forecast. We drive this model, and these are some of the details. Those who have used WRF will know. We drive this, and remember, this is for a particular event we are talking about. So for this particular event, we tried to simulate that. The simulation has not been very good. In fact, we are still working on this, but at least you look at the southwest regions where the rainfall was very high. We were able to simulate, and we have to really look at the sensitivity of the model to various parameterization schemes, etc. And that is what currently we are doing in a project under NSM, that is National Supercomputing Mission. Now, if we are able to simulate at the urban scales using the numerical weather prediction model, then we should be also able to use it on a forecast mode, so that at least next 3 to 6 hours, how the rainfall is likely to behave. Now, all of this is about rainfall, but flooding is not all about rainfall. Flooding is in fact about how the catchments behave. So we bring it down to the catchment scale then. And when we come down to the catchment scales, especially the urban catchment scales, etc., high resolution data is extremely important. And this is what we do. We use several data sets here, ASTRA and NASA data set and so on, and bring it down to this is still coarse resolution, but we are able to get the building maps and so on using several of these data sets, including Google Earth and so on. And then we include the hydrologic models complete with the drainage systems, because in urban areas, the stormwater drainage as well as the lakes and water bodies, these play a major role in absorbing the floods or in mitigating the effects of the floods. Now, there are, as I said, 100 telemetric rain gauges, and these are the drainage networks, and these are the small water bodies and lakes. And Bangalore used to be known as City of Lakes, and many of these lakes have been encroached upon, and that is why, that is one of the reasons why the city gets flooded many times. And similarly, perhaps Hyderabad also, you may have to look at these. But the response of the hydrology also depends on how we are managing the drainage system itself. So there is a dumping of solid waste inside the drains, and exactly when the drains are supposed to be functioning at full capacity, they do not. But by design, we also have several service lines inside the drains, and they become obstructions to the flows. And then we also have sewage water being let into the drainage systems and so on. So all of these will obstruct the flow. But if these drainage systems were operating fully, whether that drainage system is adequate at all is the question that we also ask through what we call as adequacy analysis, drainage system adequacy analysis. Now, through this project, we installed several of the water level sensors in the city. This will show this is a very sensitive water level sensor. Every 2 minutes, we capture the water level variation here, and very small departures in the water levels will be captured by this. Imagine that all over the city you have such a low-cost sensors placed, and continuously you are getting data onto your system, and you are able to see what is happening at which location in the city. Then we should be able to develop immediate responses through modeling and otherwise. Now this shows, I am showing, these are called as the runoff coefficient. The higher the runoff coefficient, the higher will be the flow for a given intensity of rainfall. So 0.75 indicates a very high runoff coefficient, and typically in urban areas, these are the kinds of runoff coefficients that we'll be dealing with. But even within urban areas, there will be a significant variation of the runoff coefficient itself. So if we have, this is for one of the valleys that I'm showing within the city, they are called as drainage valleys. For 0.75, for a particular rainfall intensity, this we use the 10-year 15-minute rainfall intensity, you may get a flooding situation like this. On this scale, it may be difficult to envisage or difficult to visualize how much is the increase, but you just compare with what happens if we start reducing the runoff coefficient. That is, we don't do anything else, but we reduce the runoff by holding back the rainwater in the urban areas. So 30% rainwater harvesting we do, then suddenly we see that there is a reduction in the flooding. Then we also start looking at the blockages. As I said, just exactly when the drainage systems have to operate fully efficiently, these are all choked like this. These are real situations, and they cause enormous backwater flows. And even if the rainfall intensities are not very high, these will flow back. And this we, through models, we show, because we wanted to impress upon the corporation bodies to see how quickly the flooding will increase if you do not clear these kind of blockages. Now this is fairly straightforward. Once we have the model in place, you can play around with several scenarios. But what is also important is that we need very high resolution data. And through a pilot study in our own catchment, we showed if we use LIDAR data, that is light detection and ranging. Now this is a modern technology which gives a very high resolution terrain data at 0.2 meters is what we captured. And this can be done on a vehicle mounted if it is if the area is small, or if you are doing it at the city scales, it is typically done with a heliborne technology. As you can see here, my idea of showing this was that you can almost distinguish between the leaves of the tree, and that level of resolution is what you can capture. However, whether this resolution is necessary, useful, given our modeling constraints, is a different question, and I'll come to that subsequently. So using all of such information, such high resolution information, we should be able to generate for a given intensity of rainfall, 10-year, 15-minute duration, at t is equal to 0, if the rain starts, then how it starts propagating with respect to time. This is what is shown, and we also have animations, etc., to impress upon the policymakers. But here I don't have time to show all those things. But this is essentially the idea. That is, one is look at what is happening on the high intensity rainfall, bring it down to the ground, use very high resolution data on the ground, complete with the building information, complete with lawns, parking lots, etc. Everything, all the information is put into the models. You build the resistance to flow at various locations, and then show how the flooding is likely to happen. Now these we validate with the sensor data, because we also have established sensors in Bangalore city at various locations. Now this we do for different return periods, just to show how as the return periods are changing, how the catchment is likely to behave. Now this is again with both hydrologic models as well as the high intensity rainfall variation. Then we start asking the question, the low impact development. For example, we consider several of these, a combination of infiltration trench and rain gardens, infiltration trench and rain gardens for different sub-catchments and so on. So different low impact development scenarios we develop and show how it is likely to change the depth for the same particular intensity. Also, what is the kind of aerial extent that you can reduce. And we identify through another project, we identify which are the locations at which you can put these low impact developments. Then we also look at the lake depletion. As I said, the lakes have depleted significantly in the city of Bangalore. And we show that as you start depleting the lake, the aerial extent of the flooding increases. Also, the maximum depth of the flooding in the city also increases. So this is all about urban floods. So we see, first of all, in the urban scales, whether the rainfall intensities have increased in the past. Then we project into the future to get an idea about how the intensities are likely to increase at the urban scales. And then we bring it down to the hydrologic response, develop hydrologic models, and show how the city is likely to respond. Then we also use the weather research forecasting model, that is a numerical weather prediction model, to see whether we can reconstruct these high intensity rainfall in the city. Now we'll see what is happening on the riverine floods, because the Kerala floods, Uttarakhand floods, even Kashmir floods, they were essentially riverine floods. Right at the beginning, I showed about the frequency analysis. But the frequency analysis, Whitclamps had criticized it long ago. In fact, in the 1993 itself, 1990s, early 1990s, saying that this standard frequency analysis actually becomes just a statistical analysis. So you can talk about with a 30-year sample, you can talk about 10,000 year flood and so on. But we need to start looking, especially when we are looking at the riverine flooding, we must look at other mechanisms. For example, I told about Kerala floods and Chennai floods, also the Hyderabad floods. The rainfall occurs consecutive days. Very high intensity rainfall occurs consecutive days. So the soil is completely saturated. Everything almost behaves like an urban area at that stage. That means any amount of extra water that always comes out as runoff. So we need to look at all these other processes concurrently with the single dimension analysis. Now, this is a very interesting study that has been done recently. So typically this is shown for droughts, but it is also valid for the floods, and floods, no other study is available. Therefore, I'm showing this. So in the frequency analysis, let's say you take univariate. That means you are only talking about the precipitation. You would get certain return period, let's say about 20 years or something. Now for the California drought, they have shown, if you also look at the maximum temperature, there is a heat wave that happened along with the precipitation deficit. This drought event comes out to be 200-year return period. So from 20 years, it has suddenly increased to 200 years. Whereas on the other side, what was 120 years may become just 50 years, which means that there is a significant variation between a univariate analysis and a multivariate analysis. The moment you start identifying which are those other variables that are also affecting the flooding or the droughts or any other extreme values, your return periods may start changing. And this is what is shown as compounding effects. For example, sea level rise. Now this article here shows, now if you use a univariate, the black line here, in all of these stations, the black line is the lowest. Now that shows a lower failure probability for different years. These approximately you can take it as return periods, return years. So for example, 25 years, what is the failure probability and so on. So this black line, which is a univariate analysis, keeps showing a very low value compared to multivariate, bivariate. That is, for the present climate, if you use also sea level rise, then what is the failure probability? Then for the future climate also they show. So only the univariate and with the present data always gives you the lowest probability of failure. Similarly, this is about the sea level rise. Then you also have storm surge. Along with the high intensity rainfall, you also start looking at storm surge. Then you see that the probability will suddenly start increasing. And especially in India, this is a classical study of Unikrishnan and Shankar. They have shown that most of these coastal areas, coastal cities, they have shown a increasing trend. And therefore, when we are talking about the coastal flooding, it is important for us to start looking at the compounding effects. So we cannot look at only the high intensity rainfall, but you need to also start looking at the compounding effect because of other variables which contribute to rainfall. That's about the compounding effect due to different variables. That is multivariate analysis is what we do. But there is also compounding effect because of time accumulation. That is, for example, if you see the Uttarakhand 2014 floods, June 14 to 17 consecutive days, very high intensity of rainfall. Similarly, Kashmir floods, September 2nd to September 6th, consecutively very high rainfall. Kerala floods, July, August 14 to 18, consecutively very high rainfall. So these are compounding effects across time. So we start looking at compounding effects across time. So essentially, when we look at peak over threshold, so we draw a threshold and then reckon any rainfall that happens above that threshold as an extreme value. This is one of the classical ways of doing it, along with the annual extremes that I showed earlier. Now, typically, when we do this analysis, we pick up the peak only in that particular cluster. But as I said, because the clusters have several days above this threshold, we need to look at all of these days, and therefore we must start looking at the dependence structure. You cannot simply pick up one of these because extreme value distributions also have an assumption of independence, and therefore we start including the dependence within these clusters, and then you start looking at the return periods or the probabilities of having such clusters of very high rainfall consecutive days in future. Now, this is what we did for Uttarakhand. This is Shailja Sharma's work. Uttarakhand 2013 floods, as I said, 14 to 17, consecutively 4 days. And we look at the complete monsoon days rainfall and segregate this into two different time windows, 51 to 80, and what has happened nearer the past. And then start looking at this is P1 by P2. That is a probability with this probability of the clusters occurring in this period nearer past compared to the clusters occurring farther past. So it is seen here because we are showing the logs of these. Any of these values will indicate an increase. So it is seen here that there is a very significant increase in the probabilities of extreme rainfall. And this is a 4-day cluster is what we are talking about. So increase is observed in the probabilities of the spells. No, we are not talking about single rainfall now, but we are talking about the spells of rainfall. And that's the probability that we start talking about. Then right at the beginning, I said, when we do this kind of analysis, we hold the history constant and then say that the future is likely to behave in some statistical sense similar to the historical behavior. But with climate change and with several other changes that are happening on the ground and otherwise, the future is not likely to be the same as past in statistical sense. And therefore, we start looking at the non-stationarity introduced by climate change and other changes. There are very sophisticated statistical tests available to examine the non-stationarity. But right now, we'll again come back to the 3 parameters that I mentioned, mu, sigma, and xi. In the classical stationary case, we would have held these mu, sigma, and xi constant after we estimate them based on the historical data. But now what we do is we allow these mu, sigma, especially mu and sigma, to change with time. And how do we change with time? That will depend on identification of the covariates. Now, these covariates can be simply, let's say, temperature, global temperature, or local temperature, which is known to be changing with respect to time. Or it can be some other larger scale global phenomenon like ENSO or some La Nina or those Nino index, etc. So we identify these covariates and then model these extreme rainfall with respect to those covariates. Now, when we are looking into the future, we needed downscaled values. And unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have for the Indian case studies. Therefore, we did this for the Colombia case study to ask the question, when in the future are the return levels likely to change? That is, you estimate the return levels based on the historical data. Then you project it into the future using the hydrologic projections of that particular river basin and see whether the historically estimate the return levels estimated based on the historical data are statistically significantly different from those estimated for the future period. Now, when we do this, for example, for the 75-year return period, this is the return level of the flood. For the 75-year return period, we see that up to 2027, that return period is valid. And after 2027, at 2027, there is a significant difference between what we get from the from the observed data and the future data. Now, there is a subtle aspect involved here of the return levels in the non-stationary context, that every year, let's say we are talking about a 50-year return period. Every year will have a different 50-year return period level associated with that particular event. And therefore, the return levels will be changing continuously like this. And then at a point when it is significantly different from the historical data, that is when we say that there is a detection of change at this location. So similarly for 100-year return level, etc. Now this needs to be done for several of the Indian case studies. I think our Arpita Mandal's team in IIT Bombay, they are the experts in D&A studies. And I'll show subsequently, if there is time, some of the studies that are available on D&A. These are called as the detection and attribution studies. Now, the Uttarakhand floods that I talked about, again, what we did at the urban scales, are we able to reconstruct those floods is the question. Again, we start looking at what has happened and collect all this data at several locations, complete with the DEM and so on, set up a WRF model, weather research and forecasting model. And we do this for 27, 9, and 3 kilometers domains. And then look at all these stations. We have some station data on the rainfall, but we also use the global data sets of the high intensity rainfall, and then see whether we can reconstruct the floods. Why reconstruction is important? It is because, first of all, the ground data is not adequate, and on real time, we do not get enough data, especially in the mountainous regions. And therefore, it is important for us to see whether we can use global data sets, use high resolution numerical weather prediction models, combine them with the hydrologic models, and then see whether we can reconstruct those floods. And if we can do this for different regions in the country, our capability to forecast the floods will increase tremendously. So this is one of the examples. Especially this particular line you can look at. Essentially what we are doing is that we are combining a numerical weather prediction model with a mesoscale hydrologic model. Now there are a large number of methodological details here. For example, when we are running a hydrologic model like this, you cannot run it on an event basis unless you warm up the model. So how you warm up the model and what kind of parameters you use for the extreme values, all of these become important. And these methodological details are available in our publications. You can see that. But essentially, that's the idea there. So these are some of the details as I showed for WRF. Those who are interested can have a look at it. There are a large number of different parameterization schemes, etc. we use and calibrate these models with respect to the observed ones so that we are able to get the high intensity data. Now, what this shows is that we actually considered 5 events, but out of the 5 events, we were able to reasonably satisfactorily reproduce for 3 events, event 1, event 2, event 3. These correspond to different dates. Essentially, when we are combining WRF with the weak coupled model, we are able to produce very satisfactory results for these 3 events. However, this I must qualify that this study needs to be taken further because there was a lot of uncertainty associated with the data sets that we used and so on. But the global data sets, for example, the TMPA data set we have used in this particular case. And there is also an associated paper where we simply look at all the global data sets to see their capability to reproduce high intensity rainfall. Now, these kind of studies will be useful, as I said, in reproducing and forecasting of these heavy floods, and especially in the mountainous regions where we do not have adequate data. Even the interpolated data from the IMD behaves very rather poorly in the mountainous data. Now, the last question that I would like to touch upon is, as I said earlier, that whenever a flood happens, always the reservoir operation comes into question, whether these large reservoirs that exist in those river basins were operated properly or not. Now, because most of these reservoirs are not meant only for flood control, they serve many other purposes. We must look at the operation of these reservoirs during the flood period without compromising on their other purposes, primary purposes. Now, this is what we do here. First of all, we look at how historically the dam is operated, reservoir is operated. This I'm talking about the Hirakud Dam in the Mahanadi River Basin. Then we start looking at how the peak flows are likely to change for this particular site using the global climate models, uncertainty modeling, etc. All of that story we build and then show how the peak flows are likely to change. And then we integrate all of these. Say, for example, this is the dam. It is used for hydropower, irrigation, and so on. So we cannot compromise on its primary purpose. But we are also seeing that there is a significant, you just compare these two, while the seasonal flow is likely to come down, the peak flows are likely to go up. And this is a scene everywhere. Your seasonal rainfall may remain same or perhaps even decrease a bit. But the high intensity rainfalls concentrated on certain very small time periods, these are increasing. And similarly, when you look at the peak flows are increasing, whereas the seasonal flows may be coming down. Now, these scenarios we build into the reservoir operation and ask the question, if you want to retain the same level of performance or increase the performance in terms of the hydropower and irrigation, etc., at the same time you are able to meet the increased flood discharges, how do you tweak the operation of these reservoirs? That's the question that we ask. And we do a lot of methodological improvements and start looking at the transitional probabilities using the Markov chains, etc., of the flows and build it into the long-term operation of the reservoir and show that during the flood period, say from, for example, July to September end, how do you operate the reservoir? We show different levels of adaptation. That is, if you want to retain the same level of reliability of hydropower, how do you manage? There is also a compromise between hydropower and irrigation. You want to retain a total reliability of, let's say, about 85% or some such thing, then how do you operate? Like this, we create different scenarios and show how these different rule curves here. What does the rule curve give? It gives for a particular period, what is the reservoir level that needs to be maintained. In fact, for the Kerala floods as well as for the Chennai floods, these came into question again and again. So we need to look at increased frequencies due to increased frequencies of floods, magnitudes of the floods, and the flood storage that is available here. For example, here, how much flood storage is available during the flood period, whether you cross this or you make sure that you are within this region, and so on. So how best do you use this storage without compromising on these other requirements? That's a question that we answer through this. Now, all of these details are available in this particular paper. You can just go through this. Now, in summary then, intensities are known to be increasing at several scales, both regionally as well as locally. And especially on the urban scales, city after city is showing that the intensities of rainfall are increasing. And therefore, the frequencies are changing now. What used to be, let's say, 50-year return period may be now a 20-year return period, 25-year return period. In other studies, we have also shown how the return periods change. Now, it becomes important, therefore, to develop adaptive responses to such changing conditions. And to do that, we need to fall recourse to the climate models, which provide us with the climate projections. And we address the scale issues and uncertainties. And also we use the coupled weather forecasting model, weather research forecasting models and hydrologic models to develop reliable flood forecasts. Finally, we also look at the reservoir rule curves at several different scales. By scales, I mean you may look at only one reservoir only during the flood period. You may look at integrated operation of several reservoirs. For example, in the Narmada case, we have looked at integrated operation of 8 major reservoirs and see whether you can tweak the reservoir operation policy or develop new rule curves such that the flooding intensities are changed. The only point that I did not touch upon was the detection and attribution in detail. And as I said, Dr. Arpita Mandal's team is an expert in this. So you can refer to any of these papers. Water resource research, this was one of the papers. And especially this detection of the human influence in extreme precipitation over India. Now, these, especially for the younger researchers, these can provide some interesting information. So with that, thank you again. This was a good opportunity for me to share our work. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
So thank you so much, Professor Majumdar, for this very enlightening talk. And I must say that this is a great learning experience for many of us who are working on the floods or on other aspects of hydrology and climate